Hello and welcome to the webinar, Weathering the Storm, How Communications Teams and Individuals Can Build Resilience and Protect Mental Wellbeing. My name is Philip Smith. I'm the Head of News and Content at Gorkana, and I'm delighted to be your moderator for the next 45 minutes or so. In this webinar, we're going to look at how to deal with the challenges of stress and pressure in this industry. The paradox, I suspect, with a subject like this, is that few would deny the presence of stress in the industry. Is not a subject that is addressed very often, and certainly stress and pressure are not going away. In fact, a recent CIPR State of the Profession report says that more than half of senior managers in communications are either extremely stressed or very stressed in their roles. So how do communicators deal with constant and increasing levels of pressure? Stress and pressure can make people unhappy. And aside from the personal cost, it can reduce the quality of their work and take away their ability to be both brave and be decisive. In this webinar, we'll explore some of the common sources of stress for communications professionals and the practical actions that people can take to protect themselves and their teams. Some of the topics we'll explore in the next 40-45 minutes or so include pressure and stress in PR and communications and their causes, the price of pressure, what businesses and leaders can do to protect mental well-being, the importance of leadership. To do this, I'm delighted to say that I'm joined by Ed O'Brien, Associate Director at Teneo Blue Rubicon, and Gemma Pryor, Head of External Affairs, Northern Europe at Mondelez International. Ed, Gemma, welcome to the webinar.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Excellent, great to see you both. Let me tell you a little bit about our guests before we start the presentation. Ed at Teneo Blue Rubicon focuses on leading accounts for large household name clients facing heavyweight reputational issues. He has a particular focus on issues and crisis. Gemma is Head of External Affairs, Northern Europe at Mondelez International, and says she's an experienced senior communications professional. And of course, Mondelez, you might know best as the home of Cadbury. She has a particular interest in complex and challenging industries and markets, and has worked both agency and in-house, and have been in communications for over 10 years, working across a variety of sectors. But her heartland has always been in food, from McDonald's to Pizza Hut, and now chocolate. Her strengths span corporate reputation management, strategy development, crisis and issues handling, and consumer communications. Ed and Gemma are going to jointly present some slides in a minute to kick off the webinar. They're going to present tag team style, so we'll get their views across the whole topic. But we also want to hear from those of you who are listening into the webinar, and we want to hear the questions that you might have about resilience and how to protect mental well-being. So please do take the chance to use the button on the right-hand side of your screen and send us in your questions as the webinar progresses. After the presentation, which will take about 20-25 minutes, we'll have time for a 20-minute or so question and answer session, and we'll make sure that we get to your questions. So please take that chance to send them in. One other thing, we will be sharing the slides and a recording of the webinar afterwards with everyone who has registered for it, so do look out for those later on, and we will send you an email with that information. I think at that stage, that's more than enough from me. Ed, please start the presentation.
Thank you very much, Philip. And just to give one extra kind of point on myself, one of the reasons this is a particular passion point and mission for me is, frankly, at this point in my life, I've just seen too many people in this industry upset and worn down by the pressures of it. And it's been really hard. And I just believe as a whole sector, we have to do better at that.
Thanks, Ed. And I think for me, working in-house now with a team of 10 or so extraordinary professionals, I've been inspired by them all to actually work hard to engender a workplace that's based on mindfulness and, quite frankly, fun. And so this, through that experience, has grown as a bit of a passion point of mine as well. So yeah, that's why Ed and I are sat here together as two people on a journey, not necessarily experts yet, I think would be fair to say.
So why are we talking about this? Why is this topic important? Work can be pretty stressful in any job, but comms does bring some particular challenges when it comes to mental well-being. So whether that's a campaign you work on that absolutely tanks to multiple crises happening all at once. And that's more true than ever. The increasingly quick and always-on news cycle only helps dial up that growing level of pressure. And so you enter a situation where tough moments are inevitable, and we need to harden our hearts against that. These difficult points in your life are just going to come, and in the years that we face, every one of us is going to do certain things. Every one of us is going to make a hideous mistake. Every one of us is going to get yelled at by a colleague, a client, or a journalist. And every one of us is going to end up in a state at some point, possibly multiple points, where the amount of stuff we've got on overwhelms us. Those things are just inevitable. And at this point, it's quite useful to make a distinction between pressure and stress, because they're not really the same thing. And if anyone's read Alistair Campbell's book, Winners, they might remember that he makes this differentiation really nicely and clearly, which is that pressure can be something that drives us and motivates us and pushes us to be good. But when it goes too far and when difficult moments tip over and tip us into stress, that is the key point where it becomes destructive. And looking at how it becomes destructive, there are some very real business and personal impacts that it can land. So it can make us absolutely less good at our jobs. Stress can also exhaust us and burn us out. Often it can make people leave. We've all seen people who just are not enjoying it to the extent that unfortunately they leave where they're working. It can also, and Philip touched on this, it can also make us less brave and less risk averse. That can be critical. And perhaps most importantly of all, it can make us miserable both in work and just as destructively actually can make us miserable outside of work. The impact of stress can be very, very serious.
And I think this is a great picture here that shows what happens all too often. We sort of spin off the road, fall off the wagon, fall over the side. And I think we just don't need to let it get to this point where we spin off. So we don't need to let it get to the point where we or a colleague breaks. And I think there's a real strong reason practical reason for actually this not happening, is we are in the business of people. So we don't sell any products, we don't make anything. We are all about the people who work in this industry. And so if we don't look after those people who are our assets, what do we actually have? We're actually left with nothing. And I think there's plenty of textbooks and papers out there that prove that if people are happy and people grow, then businesses grow. So I think we have a duty to dial down the stress in this industry a little bit and try and prevent that spinning off the road type feeling that this image presents. And I think that actually this isn't about completely removing all stress and all pressures. Certainly one of the long-standing things I love about this industry is the challenges and obstacles it throws at you on sometimes a daily basis, but those are the fun things that we get to deal with and get to try and overcome. And we're not going to be able to stop those. That is the fundamental of this industry, especially those of us who specialize in crisis and issues. But equally, it's not enough just to pay lip service to it, so just to polish around the edges. You can't send someone on a mindfulness course and then the minute they walk out, have a go at them about what's not been done on their to-do list. It needs to be part of our very culture and DNA. It needs to be about how we do what we do, not just what we do. And it's not just about putting everything on the individual. One of the phrases that's a real bugbear of mine, or has become a real bugbear of mine, and I've probably used it myself in the past, but would really want to not use going forward, is the phrase, they just aren't cut out for PR. And I just don't believe that's true. I actually think we need to look at ourselves and say, PR is not cut out for people sometimes. And that's what I think Ed and I both have passion points about trying to change.
So, despite those challenges that Gemma just mentioned, here's what we can't do. What we can't do as an industry is just throw our hands up and just say it's okay for people to be stressed and miserable, just to say that these challenges are insurmountable. It's absolutely not good enough. And so we need to approach it just like we'd approach any other business challenge in the sector where we work. Both as individuals and organizations, we need to make a really clear plan and take control of the situation and make it better. And to do that, there are two very key points we need to address. And we actually, our officers did focus groups on this to try and get to the nub of the challenge. And the key insight that came out of those focus groups was that, yes, you absolutely need to build individual resilience, so to thicken your skin as people against the difficult moments. However, that's not enough. And you also absolutely need to make sure that people are being managed in a way that supports them and helps them deal with pressure in a really healthy way. Just like Gemma was saying, you can't give someone a mindfulness class and then yell at them the moment they come out. You have to have those two sides of the coin. So what does that actually mean in practice? How can we really do this and help people in a practical way? So we're going to talk through, at the very top line, a few elements of those two sides of the coin. On the personal resilience side, we're going to look at the sort of building your longer-term defences, but also how to deal with acute bad moments. And then on management behaviours, we're going to talk about how to help being a negative factor in resilience yourself, but also how to be really supportive when the bomb does actually drop. So I'll come on to start with the kind of building longer-term defences. And a key point is this idea of awareness, a really good place to start. Improving your radar for when you're spinning out into a stressy place. And it's building that mental skill day on day, year on year, of clocking early when you're about to enter a really bad mental situation, catching that early and doing something about it. It is very difficult to look after yourself when you've really lost it. What you can do is look after yourself just before that point. And for people who are interested in mindfulness, that's a discipline that can really help with building that muscle because it helps you keep an eye on your own brain. And then make a plan to think in advance of when bad times might hit. What is coming up that's going to hit you like a sledgehammer and you're going to need to approach and deal with? Don't wait for that nightmare scenario to happen to then try and work out, well, how am I going to deal with it? That is way too late and you won't be able to help yourself. And then finally on the long-term front is the hardest of these three boxes by a mile, which is this idea of building a growth mindset, which fundamentally means taking an optimistic way of looking at difficult situations. Not easy. So that's when you've got a monstrous crisis or project, and rather than going, all is lost, this is awful, which I have certainly done in the past, what you do is grind yourself into the habit of taking an optimistic way of looking at it. And just a couple of examples can be, what can I learn from this? What out of this really difficult situation, when I've come out the other side, will make me better? Will it boost my profile internally to show that I've managed to survive it? And I think it's not something you can change overnight, that, as with a lot of these practices, but doing it again and again can start building that more optimistic approach. And then secondly, this idea of what happens in those acute, difficult moments. And one thing I've really come to realize is, in bad times, your brain is out to absolutely destroy you. And it really deliberately tries to create the most difficult mental processes and undermine you. And understanding that in itself really helps. So one of the first things you can do is identify what are those negative thought patterns that your brain is using as a weapon against you. A couple of examples: catastrophizing. So that's assuming this is going to go to the worst place it can, I'm going to get sacked. Or mind reading, I know what that person's thinking, they're thinking I'm an idiot. And I'll give you a quick example, which is I had a really difficult situation recently and my boss was on holiday. And so I had to kind of give her some difficult feedback, but I had to wait 5 days before she came back from holiday to tell her. And I wrote this ridiculous story about how angry she was going to be and how she was going to kind of demand my head on a pike. And it actually, luckily, I was thinking about some of this resilience stuff because you realize it's just a story that you're writing for yourself. Your brain writes a horror story. And actually it was fine, but intersect that horror story. And what I often do is write it down to say, I am mind reading. And it shines light on the monster and that takes power away from it. And that's this key point about pausing then. To stop, distance yourself from the issue and interrogate it, like shine an interrogation light on it and ask it questions. Is that person really going to be as annoyed as I think? Is it as big a deal as I think it is? What's the worst that could actually happen here? And forcing yourself to do that, really forcing yourself, makes a huge difference. Because usually, do you know what? You are making it sound worse than it is. And the extra way to really help that is to leverage support through other people. So one of the things that often happens, absolutely happens to me, is when you are in a bad place, you shut down. You kind of build walls over yourself, you don't want to look weak, don't want to talk to anyone and just want to hide and try and sweep up the problem yourself. The problem is at that moment is exactly when you need to talk to other people, otherwise you will kind of spin into the pit. So force yourself to talk to other people, even if you don't want to. And I've used the metaphor before of Alcoholics Anonymous. So if you're in AA and you need a drink, you phone your sponsor and you go, Gemma, I'm outside a bar, talk me out of it, whether you want to or not. And I think that's something we really force ourselves to do. Seek help and run it by people, because often they will go, mate, that is not a big issue, and they will just give you that external perspective and be kinder to you than you would be to yourself. The other final point on seeking support is that's very much about how to sort your head out. Also seek support in a practical sense. If a well-being challenge comes in the fact that you are horrifically overstretched, do you know what? Actually, positivity will only solve the problem so far. Fundamentally, you're going to need to raise it, you're going to need to talk to colleagues about it, and you're going to need to get it sorted. Again, do that early. So seek support both in terms of sorting your head out, but also in terms of solving the practical challenge.
Thanks, Ed. I love the monster analogy. I think there might be some of those in management behaviours as well. I think personal resilience is absolutely vital, but I'd argue that actually behaviour of managers is just as vital, and if in some cases more so. I think as managers, often managers forget the power and influence that they have over people within their teams. And I'm not just talking over the day-to-day what we do, but actually the power and influence over that person's well-being. And we often talk about taking things with you, that actually a manager can say a throwaway line or something they're not thinking through properly, and you can take it with you, you carry it with you for maybe days. So what I would say to managers, and what I try and say to myself, is actually you've got to hold a mirror up to yourself, and you've got to keep holding that mirror up to yourself. Are you, in fact, the source of the stress in the team? Is difficult situations, are they being made worse by you? And in fact, more often than not, they probably are. So holding that mirror up to yourself and identifying the behaviours that impact negatively on your team can really help you to be a better manager. And I think one of the elements of that is thinking about not just what you're doing, but how you're doing it. So if something goes wrong, or an employee isn't doing something in the way that you expected, or the result isn't quite as good as you wanted it to be, I think the golden rule has to be always start by looking at what you as the manager could have done better, rather than that individual. Could you have briefed better? Could you have given more timely feedback? Could you have been a better coach or a better leader? Could you have actually praised the individuals along the way in the process, rather than just building or criticizing? And finally, I think one of the hardest things to do is learning to let go. In PR, we probably over-index, I would say, and I have no data to back this up, but we probably over-index on type A controlling personality, in my experience. And so as you become a manager and you go on the journey of being a manager and a leader, the key to a happy environment and helping people to thrive is actually letting go, empowering employees, being open, creating a trusting environment. I honestly don't believe that ruling with an iron fist is going to deliver long-term success. And certainly one of the monsters on this side of the coin, I would say, is the micromanager monster. And that's very much about, making sure you keep that micromanager monster locked away and inside. And I still fight with that quite often, because actually giving people the space and trusting them to deliver, and sometimes that means people may fail, or they may not do it exactly the way that you do it, and that doesn't necessarily mean they failed, is okay. And I think it's all about learning from those mistakes or failures, or learning from different ways of doing things to enable everyone to grow and having that nurturing environment. And certainly in my experience, the times where I've worked in teams that are based on trust and openness, not mistrust and micromanagement, actually those teams have been much more powerful and much better performing. So this got us thinking about some of the more practical steps that managers can take. So we just came up with 3. I'm sure there's many more, but there's 3 here today that really stood out. And I think the first one of those is really protect your team. Give them the space to do a good job and actually protect them from sources of stress that come from outside the team. And I thought I'd give an example here of one that I lived through quite recently. And I'm sure a lot of you saw that Mondelez, we changed the shape of one bar of Toblerone, and I do emphasize one bar. The bars you buy in the airports are still the same shape. We did change the shape of one Toblerone bar, and it caused quite a stir in the media. In fact, it was the day before the American election, and we knocked Trump off the top spot on Twitter globally. So that was quite acclaimed fame. But during that time, you know, you think about the team that were behind having to manage that. And the press office team of just 2 people took over 300 media inquiries through phone and email in the space of about 3 or 4 hours. That's really high pressured. Anyone who's been in that kind of situation will know how high pressured that is. But equally, there was just as much internal pressure. So there was a lot of people internally at Mondelez that were perhaps taken by surprise with the extent of the media coverage. And my job really was to shield that press office team to be able to do a good job, deal with the issue at hand. And I took the internal piece myself. And also what I took upon myself was to try and remind the team who were in that at the time, at the end of the day, it is just a chocolate bar. Yes, it felt horrendous at the time. Yes, we had 300 media calls, but it's just a chocolate bar. And so I think it's important to keep spirits up as well as be a shield. And then I think there are those points where when that crisis is over or when that busy time is over, so in agency, you know, straight after a pitch or a win, you need to create an offbeat as well. And for me, I think there's sort of three things to do in an offbeat period. Celebrate. And I think you need to celebrate the wins as well as the near misses. Compensate. So compensate people for time that they've given up in their personal lives or, you know, things they've missed out on because they've helped out on that pitch or that issue. And recuperate. Take time as a team to regather and come back together. Learn from what you went through and new ways of working, what you could have done better. But definitely take those times to create an offbeat. And finally, as a manager, you need to hold yourself personally accountable. So not only hold a mirror up to yourself, but actually don't pass the buck or blame if something doesn't go right. Take the accountability yourself. Stand together as a team and stand up for your team, and that goes a long, long way.
So before we move to the Q&A section, there's 2 kind of key points to take away and remember we wanted to give you. And the first one is this idea of the raging river, because it's quite a good way of remembering and visualizing this challenge of how it's hard to help yourself once you've gone to the stressy place. So if you're on the bank of the river, if you spot it early, you can sort yourself out. But when you go into the river, and we've all had this, your ability to judge what is normal, what is appropriate, and how to help yourself is gone. And I'll just give you my example of shame. Like, I was thinking about an example of where I've most been in the river, and I was in a repitch scenario in a rehearsal where not only did I spill a coffee, it wasn't that hot, wasn't that cold either, over a colleague, but I was so glowery and stressy, and had such a face on, that she didn't feel she could get up and go and clean herself up, and only got up an hour later, after an hour or more of rehearsing, and left a massive puddle of coffee to kind of illustrate what an absolute fiend I was. And that really does show what a psycho I have become, not to be more sympathetic and say, take 10 minutes, go and sort yourself out. So that's just a reminder for all of us, and I always remember that in terms of myself, that when you're in that river, you've gone crazy. Get yourself before you fall in. And finally, the really key point I want to leave you with is that we said earlier that tough moments will inevitably happen. And that's absolutely true, stand by that. But it is not inevitable, it's absolutely not inevitable that they inherently make us stressed and they make us miserable. We can solve that, or we certainly go away to solving it, but we have to do it by taking action to make the situation better. And only by doing that can we really help our businesses, and only by doing that can we really help ourselves. So thank you very much, and I'm going to hand over now to Philip for the Q&A section.
Excellent. Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Gemma. We're going to take on your questions, so do keep sending in your questions for Ed and Gemma, and we will start getting those answered in a second. But what I wanted to do, just before we go to those, and Gemma, I'll start with you on this, is that you both talked eloquently about the theory behind some of these issues, and also some very practical tips and advice on how to put things in action. But there's a lot there. So what's the one thing, Gemma, you would ask people to take away from this webinar as an actionable thing that they should be putting into practice tomorrow if they can?
So, yes, thank you, Philip. I think from a manager point of view, the one practical thing you can do is just appreciate people more. I think we're an industry that doesn't celebrate each other enough. And I'm not talking about, big grand awards. I think just saying thank you, treating each other like human beings, and remembering that the people in this industry are the assets. There isn't anything else. So let's celebrate those people. And I think there's really simple things you can do, from just, I know someone who sends a Friday email, and every Friday they send an email to the team and they just say, great week, yeah, there was a tough bit here, go off and have a good weekend. So then everyone in the team leaves on a Friday on a good note, not carrying, as I mentioned earlier, carrying negativity with them from other things that might have happened. So I think there's just really simple things to celebrate people and be nice to people.
Excellent, thank you. Ed, what about yourself? What's the one piece of actionable advice you'd ask people to try and put into practice tomorrow if they can?
I think a lot of the things we're talking about today, you can go a long way to solving them by pausing. So Gemma talked about this kind of type A personality, or people in PR often feel we have to do it, solve it right now. Perfect example is when a crisis hits and you phone the client 4 seconds later. Take 30 seconds, take a minute, get your head together, keep an eye on what your mind is doing and whether it's trying to assassinate you, but take that pause, because you can only do that thinking and control yourself by creating a distinct sort of vacuum between an incident and between your own response to it. And to Gemma's point on management, that is even more important when you're a team leader, because there's nothing worse than someone who storms into the team meeting saying there's been a disaster because they have not got themselves under control. Pause, think if it really is a disaster, and walk in and talk about it in a controlled and calm fashion. Set the tone.
You both had plenty of experience in the industry and worked in different businesses. And Gemma, for instance, I know you've worked both sides of the fence. You've been in-house and you've been in an agency. This is a question that's been sent in by someone who I suspect is in-house, but may not be. But certainly the way the question is posed, I think I'll come to you first on this, Gemma. And this is about, really, you've talked a lot about teams and how people can be supportive in businesses. This question gets to the other end of the spectrum, and the question is, how can you help yourself if you're a PR team of one?
I think that's a great question. And I think as a PR team as one, you've probably got to have even more personal resilience than when you're in a bigger team. And I think going back to some of Ed's points about actually preparing yourself for, how you can prevent yourself spinning off. And one of the things I would say is setting goals is really, really important, and we all know that. And in various businesses, there's cyclical goal and appraisal setting cycles. But probably what we don't do enough of is when we set those goals, actually thinking through what are the obstacles that might get in the way or prevent us from reaching those goals. So if you're a team of one, thinking about what you want to achieve, thinking practically what might get in the way of me achieving that, and then trying to come up with solutions for overcoming those obstacles. And I guess, on a slightly, just give yourself a break. You know what? If you work lots of hours one week, work less the next. You're a human being, not a machine, and a human being of one trying to do this kind of job is very admirable. So I think, give yourself a break, celebrate yourself. We all work very hard in this industry, so take the time.
Excellent. Ed, would you like to take this on as well?
The only other thing I'd build on that is that if you're in a team of one, you need to find a support network of some sort. So the danger I'd imagine of being a team of one, which I haven't personally been, but I can imagine if you've got a real challenge, you're just going to run it into the ground in your own head if you can't get out and vocalize it with other people. So find someone, whether that's someone else, might be someone in marketing if you're in comms, might be a colleague who works in digital, might be someone else in your professional network. Maybe if you're working in-house, for instance, find like-minded teams of one. But I think the importance of having someone where you can just run something by and go, is this that big a deal? Am I going to lose my job? And to get someone to give you that splash of water in the face and be that kind of voice of calm will be really important. So I think find a support network of some sort.
Yeah. And as someone from my side of being an ex-journalist, one thing I've noticed about the PR industry is there are so many networks. There are so many supportive networks across the whole industry, whether it's physically at events, whether it's what's happening online, that you can always find some form of support. And I can see people doing that all the time. Gemma, can I ask you about, you came up with this brilliant three M's acronym, which will probably haunt my dreams from now on, the micromanager monster. And I can see that someone's picked up on your management behavior monsters, and there's a question related to those. So I'll come to you first on this, Gemma. Have you got any examples or tips for individuals to challenge those management behavior monsters?
I like the fact that the monster is becoming a theme of the webinar. I think it's a good question, because actually, from a personal experience, my manager monster is micromanaging. So certainly, if you spoke to people who I worked with earlier in my career, they would describe me as a micromanager, and it's something that I've had to work very hard at. And it goes against my entire personality, the way I am at home. If you ask my husband, I think he would describe me as a micromanager. So it is something that comes naturally to me. But I think, taking the leap and trusting people within your team, even if you're not sure whether they're going to be able to achieve what you've set out to achieve, it's really quite freeing. And it does end up delivering results. People are better for being allowed space to grow themselves, and space to try things out, and permission to, fail, or permission to not quite get it right, and that's okay, because we're all humans and we all, need to learn. So for me, I think I have to, on a practical level, sometimes, like Ed said earlier, actually just pause and physically put that micromanager monster back in a box and just stop. Just don't talk. Just don't let it out. And then you see other people flourish, and then that's way more satisfying than micromanaging someone's task list, when you see someone flourish because of your behaviours.
And that's such a true point, isn't it? That the manager themselves, they're human as well. Yeah. They can be affected by these issues and can be facing them as well. Ed?
I think one key thing, if you're on the other side of that coin, so if you have a manager who is exhibiting monstrous behavior in some form towards yourself, tell them. In 99% of cases, there are some bad people out there, of course, but in most cases where you go to a manager and go, look, it's really awkward, but there's something you do, and it's really running me down. Actually, in most cases, people go, oh my God, I didn't realize I was doing that, and try and do something about it. So if in doubt, engage them on it, be really straight, don't sugarcoat it, and work together better on it. Because most people want to get the best out of their team, so just don't keep it inside.
Gemma, you used an example about shielding a team to help them do their job properly. And we've got a question that I think, again, I'll come to you first on this, Gemma, but I'll come to both of you on this question. It is about, how do you shield your team from bad decisions at the top of the organisation, which result in the team having to deliver based on these decisions? How much can, and that's been put in capitals, how much can you shield them from this? So I guess, is there an ability to a time when you can't really shield people from things? And of course, this does imply that there are bad decisions. Sometimes there are decisions made that are perfectly good, but are putting pressure on people as well. Gemma?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Having moved in-house, you realise that a lot of business decisions are based on more than reputational impact. And it might sound obvious, but actually, when you're in agency, everything is about reputation. When you move in-house, you realise everything isn't about reputation. I mean, it should be, but it's not. And sometimes business decisions are made because they are the right decisions for the business, and they may feel like bad decisions for us in the comms departments or the corporate affairs departments. And I think it's about having perspective. So if there's a decision that's made and then the corporate affairs department are the ones cleaning up the mess or dealing with that decision or the fallout from that decision. So some people might argue that changing the shape of Toblerone was a bad decision. Wherefore actually, maybe it wasn't. Maybe it's the right decision for the business. Business is facing unprecedented costs, increasing costs. A business decision is made. And I think it's about, reminding the team why these decisions have been made and what's the reason behind them. And then explaining to the team, especially in our industry, do you know what, this isn't your fault. This isn't something you need to fix. This is a decision that's made by the business. And what we can do is manage that the best way we possibly can with the tools that we have. So I think it's about providing that perspective so that the team can just take a breath and say, yeah, okay, I can see, I've got perspective. This problem isn't necessarily as big as we might all feel it is, and then we can just get on with managing it. So that would be my take on that.
For me, I think there's something here, particularly so if an example of a kind of way this can manifest itself, if I understand the question right, is where something horrific has happened and you've sort of got to do the cleanup for it, as kind of Gemma was mentioning. And I think a really key point here, both for teams and for oneself, is really realistic goal setting. So if you've got a horrible story you're having to do the reactive stuff for, it's not going to become, and that's from a business decision at the top, it's not going to become magically an amazing set of coverage and social conversations. It's not suddenly going to turn into a positive story. So what you can do to help the team is say, look, what we're trying to do here is turn kind of a 10-0. I literally use this analogy all the time. We're trying to turn a 10-0 into a 10-1 here. That's all we're trying to do. And let's hold ourselves to that and pressurize ourselves on that. But let's not pressurize ourselves that we think there's some sort of 11-10 turnaround. That's not happening today. But let's celebrate managing to kind of get that kind of dignity, clawing back a bit of ground. And sometimes that's the hardest part of our job. And that clawing back that ground can be heroic. So make sure the team know that is a heroic act.
There's another phrase, and I must say, I think this webinar has been packed with phrases that resonate, but I think this was your phrase, Ed, about hideous mistakes, and that appears to have resonated.
It's good that people have noticed that.
Absolutely. And I think this may be a question, actually, about how you bounce back, bounce back ability and all of that. The question is, and Ed, I'll come to you on this, what is your advice for how to overcome those hideous mistakes referenced at the beginning of the webinar?
I think there's a lot of different ways to do it. I think one of the key things to do, though, is understand and get out of your head that it happens to people all the time. So we're running trainings at TBR about resilience and working together on it. And actually, one of the key things that helps people in those trainings is, the formal skills and the practical stuff we're teaching. Yeah, that's great. But actually, it's the sharing of the horror stories people have that seems to make the most psychological difference. So there's things you can do, but the key one, I'd say, is talk to other people about the mistakes they've made. We have all sent the wrong thing to a journalist. We have all fluffed a presentation. The problem is when you're in the intensity of that feeling is you think, oh my God, I am the only person who has ever made this error. And that is the path to hell. So share with other people and gain perspective through their experiences.
Thank you. Gemma, you made a point about a phrase that sort of turned into a bugbear for you about, this person just isn't right for PR. And we have a question which is about that. And actually, when do people know that they're in the right job or not, particularly in PR? So the question is, how do you know whether PR isn't for you or whether you just need more confidence or support? How long do you wait before you give up?
Oh, that question is giving me very mixed feelings. I think I'd be keen if the person wants to connect with Ed and I after to have more of a personal conversation about this, because I think it feels quite loaded, the question. But I think you need to try and distinguish between the it, the me, and the us. So the it is all about, and this is something we do at Mondelez, and the team that I work in are really good at doing this. And that's sort of saying, like, the it is sort of what we do, the selling in of press releases, the writing of articles, etc. And do you enjoy that? Is that for you? If you enjoy that and the skills, then PR probably is for you. And actually, then I think it's about finding the right network and the right people around you to inspire you and help you build confidence and build that support. And if that's not happening where you're working, try and ask for that, or set that up where you're working, or reach out to the many networks in PR that you alluded to. And I think, how long do you wait before you give up? I don't know whether you should sit and wait and then give up. It's probably more, for me, it's, do try to do some of the things that we've talked about in the webinar today, and do reach out and look for mentors, and do try different bits of PR. PR is extremely varied. So, in my career, I've worked in small agency, large global agency, startup business, and, the world's largest snacking company. So just try lots of different things. It might be that the bit of PR that you're in right now isn't cut out for you and isn't right for you. You not being right for it. So.
And there's a classic example there, isn't there? That some people really enjoy working in-house, some people really like working in agency, and sometimes you don't know that till you're actually that side of the fence. Ed?
And actually, that leads to a really important point, which is, in terms of that question, how long to give yourself? One key thing is, give yourself longer if you're making a really substantive change. And that actually applies to managers as well as individuals. So one of the times that people will need longer to adapt is if you are coming from in-house to agency, let's say, or you're coming to be from a journalist to work in agency, give yourself a break. Those are big steps, and some of the biggest wellbeing challenges I've seen are people hopping across fences and suddenly thinking, well, I should be amazing at this in 3 months. Give yourself a break, and if you're their managers, give them a break and build space to find out whether you really like it, rather than building an expectation that you have to excel on day one.
Yeah, and I think, just to go back to the, I realised I didn't finish the me, the us, and the it bit. The skills is important, but also who you're working with and the environment. So the us, the team you surround yourself with, those can be very different depending on where you work. So I think it's equally as important to find the right people to work with as it is to find the right work to do.
Of course. And what I would say there, and actually I think I can extend this invitation to anyone on the webinar, is if you'd like to follow up any of these questions or any of these themes offline, and get in touch with Ed and Gemma separately, just put something in the question box and say so. We'll have your email details and we can contact you and make sure that a connection is made. So just say that, and particularly to the person who asked that question, if you'd like to follow up with Gemma and Ed, just say so, and we'll obviously confidentially share your email details, and they can be in touch. Ed, I'm going to ask you about the industry and whether it's a bit macho. This is a question that comes in. And I think this is a very serious point in the sense of what can people reveal and what can they be in terms of vulnerable and maybe expressing themselves. So the question is, it can be a bit of a macho industry. How do we show our teams that it's okay to say things are getting a bit much sometimes?
It's interesting. I know exactly what the question asks to mean, because even though it's a female-dominated statistically industry, it is quite macho. I know exactly. Maybe it's a professional service thing, but it can feel you can't share it. And I think the simple answer is, if you are coming from a managerial point of view, lead that from the top. So if you never own up to weakness and you're the boss, how on earth do you expect your team to put their hand up and go, I'm really struggling with this? You can't. They will follow you. It's like Gemma says, you set the tempo as the manager. So I knew when I was at Ketchum, one of the deputy CEOs was really good at being honest and telling stories about their screw-ups and how they got over them. I remember them literally telling a story about how once they were kind of in tears about a financial thing and the head of finance helped them out and they were sort of, he saved the day. But I remember really noticing that. So, and he was, a confident guy, but that vulnerability I found very impressive. And as I've looked back on that little speech he gave, I realised, I think, that he was setting other people up with permission to sort of be vulnerable and to say where they're struggling. So my key point would be, only by kind of opening up yourself can you set the pace for other people to do so.
Yes, I would agree, and I think it's really important to have those times in the week or at the beginning of meetings where you actually allow people to talk about how they're feeling. And this was one of the biggest changes for me when I jumped the fence from agency to in-house at Mondelez, was that Mondelez do spend time in team meetings, significant amount of time, talking about how people feel. And there's permission to say, actually today I'm not feeling that great, or I'm feeling really stressed and I could do with a good old cry. I'm really pleased to be in this team meeting and feel sort of in a bit of a safe cocoon with the team, and that feels amazing. So I think actually giving people permission to talk about how they feel, and that not then being used against them at a later date, is really, really therapeutic, and does take a bit of that macho-ness out of our female-dominated industry. Yeah.
Can I ask you both about culture? And I think this is a question, I'll start with you on this, Ed, and this is a question about culture in a business, and I think culture of leadership and coming from the top. So the question is this, and I'm going to start actually with a statement because it's a compliment. Excellent presentation, thank you. And the question is, I totally agree with the protecting your own team point, but the culture has to come from the very top. If there is a disconnect there, how do you bridge the gap? So I assume this is a gap between either leadership of an organization or leadership of the team and the team itself. Ed, do you think there's a way of bridging that gap?
I think the answer is probably to an extent, but only to an extent. I think one real danger in the area of resilience and well-being is if people feel you're giving them weasel words. So if you're saying, yeah, we take well-being really importantly, and then the head of your company thunders about how everyone should be working every weekend and he doesn't care if they cry about it, people clock that disconnect, and that's the basis of your question. So I would say yes, if there is a real disconnect, you can engage with senior management and say, can we solve this? That may be changeable. You can at the very least, though, if that situation arises, say, okay, if I'm the head of a team, what can I do for my team? We all got bosses, we've all got leadership. If there is a disconnect, what you can do is say, my team is going to be all right. And as a leader, I will be the shield, to Gemma's wording earlier, that stops maybe dissonant practice from the top impacting my team as hard as it can. So only to an extent, but I think you can help.
Great.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. I think, there's certain things that are beyond our pay grades and beyond our control. And I think, you have to recognize what you can control and what you can't, and make peace with that. And I think that what you can control is, yes, your immediate environment. So if you are a manager, even if you're, new manager of one person, actually, take that proactive decision to make that the best possible team, can be. And I think, setting some parameters around how people work, what the downtime is, what the offbeat is, how you celebrate as a team, how you team build. I think you can do that in your immediate sort of sphere and environment. And then, even as a team of one, I think you can do that. So I think that would be my set the parameters within what you can control and just make a difference in that space.
On that note, can I ask you about how you request support? So this is a question that's come in about how you almost sort of put up the red flag and say you need a bit of help. So this question is, as an employee, if we feel that we aren't receiving the support needed to enable us to do our best, e.g., if we could have achieved better results had we had more support from our manager, how can we best express this without it seeming like we are not accepting responsibility or by appearing insecure and unconfident? So Gemma, on that side, do you feel there is a way of approaching that request for support?
Yeah, I think there's lots of ways, and I think personally I've probably gone about it some wrong ways that involve emotions and tears or other coping mechanisms to try and because you get to the point where you've spun off the road. So I think, back to some of Ed's point, trying to nip this in the bud before you spin off the road. And I think sometimes, managers are people too. I think you mentioned it earlier, Philip. Managers are people too. So quite often those managers may not be aware that they aren't giving you the right kind of support. And so actually just having the courage to have a conversation with them, whether it's over a coffee or a beer, so it doesn't feel so intense as a one-to-one in a boardroom, or whether it's something more sophisticated where you actually all go through like MBTI or Myers-Briggs, which helps you each identify your personality type and how those personality types can best interact with each other and how personality types like to be managed. So someone who's more introverted may want to think problems through a little bit more and need to be given the space to do that. Wherefore someone who's more extroverted will just say whatever they want to say straight away and they want to get to a decision really quickly. I mean, Myers-Briggs is obviously way more complicated than that, but I think, yeah, understanding your different personality types to work together and just being brave enough to feed back. If you don't tell your manager, how are they supposed to know?
Ed?
I think one really interesting part of that question is that the fact that you don't want to be seen as making excuses. And I think that's exactly the right instinct. So if you're coming for support, but you're saying you haven't been supported well enough, things have gone wrong, don't try and paint it as something totally beyond your control. If there's stuff you've messed up, I think you can be really productive in that conversation by going, look, I need support. I maybe didn't handle it perfectly myself. Maybe I was snappy. Maybe I rushed things and did them wrong. Don't hide from that. People love, in my experience, people being honest about where people have dropped the ball, but say, but I still need help. I think the problem comes when people go, I've got lots of pressures and it's really difficult. I've made lots of mistakes, but they weren't my fault. It's because I didn't have the support. Just go into what's your fault and then by that be empowered to ask with a straight face for support.
We're running out of time, I'm afraid, but we've got time for another couple of questions. So we're going to finish with those. But if you've got a quick question still to ask, please do send it in, and we'll try and get that answered before we finish. Ed, I'm going to start with again on the overall context of sport, and I suppose it's everyone knows, particularly in the UK at the moment, with all the election looming, we've got Brexit on the calendar. It's a volatile economic environment. How do you think people can justify putting focus and resource into this area? Because in some ways this is seen as a softer area. It's about people, it's about well-being and so on. How do you make the argument that this is an area that should be invested in?
I would really argue you can't justify not putting money and resource into this area. Fundamentally, whether you are, Gemma kind of touched on this earlier, whether you are an in-house team or whether you're a comms team, all you have is your people. And in terms of competitive advantage, the organisations that have the best people and have them in the most tuned up state will win. There's not much really in our jobs beyond that. And so fundamentally, if organisations don't take this seriously, they will lose the best people. Best people, good people can move more easily. They will lose the best people, and the people they have will not perform. So only by really making sure people are supported and therefore brilliant can you win competitively.
Right, thank you. I'm going to finish with a question for you, Gemma, which is, again, someone who sounds like actually they're a crossroads, and this is about sort of almost when you decide that you're fighting a losing battle or not. And it's quite a detailed question, but I think it's an important one, and we'll finish with this. The question is, I love my team and nurturing them. I unfortunately don't have any direction or support from my own director. I've spoken with them about this, but it's been made clear that staff retention and well-being and development is not a priority at all. It's really getting me down, but I'm trying to stay positive for my team, who I really value. At what point do I cut and run? I hate quitting because of one person, but I really want to learn and develop myself as well as leading a team. So there's an element here of working towards the team, but also working for yourself and worrying about your own career. What's your perspective on that, Jen?
Yeah, I think it's probably not an unusual situation to find yourself in, and probably not isolated to the PR industry either. I think, you need to grow as a manager and as an individual and have development opportunities. And I think there probably does come a tipping point where actually, if you aren't empowered to grow and getting that support, does there become a tipping point where actually you can only take the team so far? And I wonder whether actually, instead of looking on it as, quitting and running, actually, I've taken this as far as I can. I've given it 100%. I've done everything I possibly can. And now, for the sake of my team and myself, it's time to move on. And, we don't work in a world where you need to stay in the same job for your whole career. And certainly I'm a big advocate of fresh thinking, fresh blood, and, trying new things all the time. I think my longest job is 5 years, and I see that as a good thing. So I think, do your very best, and then it's not about quitting. It's about moving on and giving maybe someone else in your team a chance to have a go.
Thank you. I have to say, one of the worst parts of my job is that I always have to cut things short. I can tell, and obviously, that a lot that's been said in this webinar, and thank you to everyone who sent in compliments as well. that it's really resonated with all of you who've been listening in. So I really want to thank Ed and I really want to thank Gemma for their time and for dealing with such a broad range of questions as well, but it's clearly such an important issue that is resonating across the sector. I want to thank everyone who sent in their questions, and of course I want to particularly thank Ed and Gemma for their time and their expertise. Do keep an eye out for the slides and a recording of the webinar, which we will email to everyone registered, and they will get that soon. Summer's approaching, but we're not slowing down at Gorkana. June means Cannes, so the Advertising and Media Festival is coming up. So look out for details of a webinar on PR and creativity, which will be taking place in June. Otherwise, thanks again to Ed and Gemma, and thank you all for listening in and taking part in the webinar today. See you soon. The webinar is now